It's 2 in the morning, Christmas Eve, 1943. Majority of my friends are sleeping in their bunks, but I myself cannot fall asleep. In truth, the events of today were so much like a fairy tale that if I didn't witness them myself, I would not have believed them for the world. Just imagine that while you were home in London with the family, singing Christmas carols in front of the fire, I was doing the same with the enemy soldiers on the battlefields of France. There were little fighting afoot. First few battles of the war left so many dead that both sides had to wait and wait for the replacements from home to come over and help us out. The only thing that was left was waiting. And what a terrible wait it was, full of anxiety and fear. And the rain, it fell almost daily, and of course the water collected up in our trenches and we had to bail it out with pots and pans. And with water came mud, almost a foot thick of it. It splattered and caked everywhere and our boots constantly got stuck in it. With all these hardships, we could not help but feel curious about the German soldiers on the other side. Their first trench was over 50 yards away from ours. Of course, we hated them when they killed our friends, but on other days, we could not help but think, how much in common do we really have with them? They were dealt the same cards we were. They were putting the same mud we were sleeping in. Yesterday was the first time we had our first good freeze. And as cold as we were, we welcomed it because at least the mud froze over. Everything was tinted with white frost. The sun was shining bright overhead. Perfect Christmas weather. During the day, there was little to no fighting. And as darkness fell, it was completely silent. Our first total silence of the months. We could not help but feel hopeful that this holiday is going to be quiet. But our officer discouraged us of it, saying that the Germans are just waiting for the right moment to strike and catch us off guard. I went back to my dugout to get some rest, and I might have fell asleep on my cot. I woke up to my friend John shaking me awake, saying, "Come, wake up, come see what the Germans are doing." I got up, grabbed my rifle, went up to the end of the trench and looked up. What I saw was the most lovely sight I've seen since the beginning of the war. Little clusters of light were spread out along the German trenches, left and right as far as the eye could see. "What are those?" I asked John, and he replied, "Christmas trees." There it was. Germans have set up Christmas trees along their trenches, lit with lanterns and candle lights, with beacons of goodwill. And then we heard the German voices raised in song. When they finished, we applauded. British soldiers applauding the Germans across the no man's land. And then one of our own started singing a Christmas carol, and we joined in. In truth, we were nowhere near as good as the Germans with all their fine harmonies. But they applauded us just as enthusiastically as we did them. And then they started singing another Christmas carol, and we joined in. British and German soldiers singing Christmas carols across the no man's land. I thought nothing could top this off, and yet what happened later was even more fantastic than this. "English, come over," we heard one of the Germans shout. "You no shoot, we no shoot." Back in the trench, we looked at each other in bewilderment, and then one of my friends shouted back, "You come over first." To our amazement, we saw two figures climb out of the trench, come across the barbed wire, and advance across the no man's land unarmed. They stopped halfway and said, "Send your officer to talk." Our officer put down his rifle, climbed out of the trench, and led the Germans halfway. We heard them talk, and he came back in a minute with a German cigar in his mouth. We decided there's going to be no shooting until midnight tomorrow, he announced. And in no time, there were over 100 officers and soldiers piled in the no man's land, shaking the hand of the men they were just trying to kill hours earlier. Some of the English knew German, But I've noticed that more Germans knew English, and I wondered why that was. The majority of us worked back in England before the war, said one of the German soldiers I'd talked to that day. In fact, I myself waited tables at the Hotel Cecile in London. Perhaps I waited on Europe? I smiled and said, perhaps. Those who could not converse would still exchange presents. Our coffee for their tea, our cigarettes for their cigars, badges and buttons from the uniforms changed the owners, and one of our lads walked off with a famous spiked helmet. When the night fell, we exchanged some more Christmas carols around the bonfire, and when it grew really late, we went back to our trenches with the promise of meeting again tomorrow and possible talk of a football match. Now, have you ever heard of a Christmas Eve such as this in all history? And what does this mean, this strange and impossible befriendment of enemies? All the nations say they want peace, and yet, on Christmas Day, I wonder, do we want it to come bad enough?
Very good.